This isn't a story I ever thought I'd tell, but it happened. Every single word of it is true, and it's a memory I've had to learn to live with. The weight of the program in my hands felt heavier than paper and ink. It was a dense, cream-colored booklet, the Columbia University crest embossed in gold, each page listing the names of 1,000 futures. My son's name, Leo Martin, was in there, a tiny black inscription that represented 18 years of my life. Across the aisle, my ex-husband, Mark, caught my eye and gave a magnanimous nod, as if we were co-investors celebrating a wildly successful IPO. The immediate, shocking betrayal wasn't in his smile, but in the words he whispered to his brother beside him, a stage whisper loud enough to slice through the air and find my ears, all those years of investment, finally paying off. I always knew he had it in him. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The sound of Mark's voice sent a tremor through me, a ghost vibration from a past I had tried to bury under layers of sheer, relentless effort. His investment. The word was a lit match in a room full of gasoline. It transported me back 18 years, to a different piece of paper, a different life. It wasn't a graduation program, it was a foreclosure notice taped to the front door of our little starter home in Montclair, New Jersey. The air in that memory was thick with the scent of stale coffee and desperation. Leo was too, asleep in his crib upstairs, his small chest rising and falling in blissful ignorance. Mark was standing in the hallway, his designer suitcase, a ridiculous, optimistic purchase from a business trip he'd taken months before, at his feet. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was worse. He was calm, detached, like a surgeon explaining a procedure that would kill the patient but save himself. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah," he'd said, his eyes avoiding mine, fixing on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "This life. The mortgage payments, the bills. Leo crying all night. It's a cage. I'm not built for a cage." I remember the pattern on the wallpaper behind him, a faded floral print that suddenly seemed pathetic and drab. I remember my own voice, a thin, reedy sound I barely recognized. "A cage? This is our family, Mark. This is our son. What are you talking about?" He'd sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured burden. "I'm talking about living. I'm talking about not wanting to wake up at 45 with nothing to show for my life but a stack of bills and a minivan. I need to get out. Find myself. Be the man I was supposed to be." He promised, of course. They always do. He promised he'd send money. He promised he would always be there for Leo, that this wasn't about him, it was about Mark needing space to become a better father from a distance. "I'll call every week," he'd said, pulling on his jacket. "You and Leo will always be my #1 priority." The words were smooth, practiced, and utterly hollow. I stood there, mute with shock, my mind a frantic scramble of numbers, mortgage, car payment, diapers, formula. As he reached for the doorknob, I finally found words, a desperate, last-ditch plea. "Don't do this to him, Mark. Please. Don't do this to us." He turned back, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or just the inconvenience of being confronted with real-world consequences. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cool, hard mask of self-preservation. "It's better this way, Sarah. In the long run, you'll see." Then he opened the door, and the gray, unforgiving light of a New Jersey morning flooded the hallway. He stepped out, and with the final, definitive click of the latch, the world went silent. It was a profound, terrifying silence, the kind that rushes in to fill a vacuum. And in that quiet, as I stood clutching a foreclosure notice in one hand and the shreds of my life in the other, I understood. I was alone. The silence was mine to fill, the debts were mine to pay, and the little boy sleeping upstairs was mine, and mine alone, to raise. The first year was a blur of frantic motion, a constant, grinding battle against the undertow of poverty. I sold the house before the bank could take it, managing to salvage just enough to put a security deposit on a cramped two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The rhythmic thumping of the machines below became the soundtrack to my life, a constant reminder that the world kept spinning, laundry kept piling up, and bills kept coming due. I found a job as a paralegal at a small law firm in Newark, a position I was wildly underqualified for but secured through sheer, unblinking desperation in the interview. My days started at 5 a.m., getting Leo ready for daycare. My nights ended long after midnight, poring over legal documents with tired, burning eyes. My second job was on weekends, waitressing at a diner where the smell of grease and burnt coffee clung to my clothes and hair. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My diet consisted of Leo's leftover macaroni and cheese and endless cups of bitter coffee. I was a ghost haunting the edges of my own life, a machine fueled by caffeine and the primal, unyielding terror of failing my son. Mark's promises dissolved like sugar in rain. The first month, a check for a few $100s arrived, accompanied by a short, self-pitying note about his transition expenses. The next month, the check was smaller. The month after that, it didn't come at all. His weekly calls dwindled to monthly, then to sporadic, guilt-ridden texts. His excuses were a rotating carousel of clichés. The market's in a downturn, Sarah, my commissions are shot. My cost of living in the city is just astronomical. I'm trying to build a future, you know. For all of us, eventually. Each lie was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but together they left me bleeding. I watched from afar as his life, unburdened by us, began to flourish. He landed a job at a prestigious investment firm in Manhattan. While I was counting out change to buy generic brand diapers, he was sending postcards from ski trips in Aspen and beach vacations in the Caribbean. He never sent them to me, of course. They were for his parents, who would then call me and cluelessly relay Mark's grand adventures, their voices tinged with a pride that made my stomach clench. Oh, Mark is just... As Leo tore into the gift, Mark draped a casual arm around his son, ruffling his hair for the assembled audience of aunts and uncles. He gets his smarts from me, Mark announced to the room. I've been coaching him in math over the phone, helping him with his homework. Straight A's this semester. The kid's a natural. I froze, a plate of Christmas cookies halfway to my mouth. It was such a bald-faced, effortless lie. Mark hadn't spoken to Leo on the phone in over 2 months. He had no idea what grade Leo was in, let alone what his report card looked like. I was the one who sat at the kitchen table with him night after night, patiently explaining fractions and long division until my own head swam. I was the one who went to every parent-teacher conference, who beamed with pride when his teacher told me he was at the top of his class. But in that moment, I was invisible. Mark had purchased the moment, bought the credit with a game console, and no one in that room questioned it. They all nodded and smiled, basking in the glow of the proud father. I said nothing. I just stood there, the sweet taste of gingerbread turning to ash in my mouth. That night, after I'd tucked Leo into his bed at his grandparents' house, surrounded by his new toys, I couldn't sleep. I crept downstairs and logged onto the family's desktop computer. I don't know what I was looking for. Confirmation, maybe. Proof that the man I was seeing wasn't a phantom of my own resentment. I typed his name into the new social media site, Facebook. And there he was. His profile picture showed him standing on a sailboat, his arm wrapped around a blonde woman with a smile as bright and hard as a diamond. Her name was Jessica. His relationship status said, engaged. His page was a gleaming monument to his new life. Photos of expensive dinners at Balthazar, weekends in the Hamptons, and charity galas at the Plaza. And then I saw the caption that stopped my heart. It was under a photo of him and Jessica, clinking champagne glasses on a balcony overlooking Central Park. It read, "A toast to the future and to family. It's everything. Family." The word echoed in the silent, darkened room. I thought of the macaroni dinners, the second-hand clothes, the hollow feeling in my own stomach when I gave Leo the last of the milk. A cold, hard knot of rage began to form deep inside me, a tiny, dense star of anger that I knew, even then, would one day have to explode. Mark's power grew in direct proportion to his distance from us. His life in Manhattan was a fortress of wealth and influence, and from its ramparts, he would occasionally fire off a missile of condescension that always found its mark. He married Jessica in a lavish ceremony at the St. Regis, an event I only learned about through a glossy announcement in the New York Times Society pages. They bought a sprawling pre-war apartment on the Upper East Side, the kind with a doorman and herringbone floors. Jessica was a partner at a corporate law firm, a woman whose world was so far removed from mine it might as well have been on another planet. She treated my existence as a quaint, slightly embarrassing historical footnote in her husband's life. On the rare occasions I had to interact with her, she spoke to me with the patronizing politeness one reserves for the hired help. The power he wielded wasn't just financial, it was psychological. He had mastered the art of making me feel like a beggar at his gates. When Leo needed braces, an expense my threadbare insurance barely touched, I had to make the call. I practiced the conversation in my head for days, trying to find a tone that was firm but not demanding, needy but not pathetic. When I finally reached him, he let out a long, weary sigh, as if I'd asked him to donate a kidney. Braces, huh? Wow, Sarah. They really get you coming and going, don't they? He said, a feigned camaraderie that made my skin crawl. Look, things are tight right now. We're redoing the kitchen, you have no idea what custom cabinetry costs these days. I remember standing in my own cramped kitchen, looking at the peeling linoleum and the faucet that dripped no matter how hard I tightened it. I listened in silence as he detailed the absurd cost of Italian marble countertops. Finally, after making me wait, after making me feel the full weight of his largesse, he agreed. All right, fine. I'll wire you the money. Consider it an early birthday present for him or something. It wasn't a contribution. It wasn't his legal or moral obligation. It was a gift, a charitable act from a benevolent king, and he made sure I understood that. He wired exactly half the amount, and not a penny more. But the true masterstroke of his campaign to rewrite history came when Leo was a senior in high school. My son, my brilliant, hardworking son, had set his sights on one school and one school only, Columbia University. It was his dream. He'd spent years sacrificing his social life, staying up all night studying, honing his application until it shone. I supported him every step of the way, proofreading his essays, driving him to SAT prep courses, and whispering words of encouragement when the pressure became too much. When the acceptance letter arrived, a thick, stately envelope in the mail, we cried and hugged in the middle of our small living room. It was the culmination of everything we had worked for, a victory that felt entirely our own. My first instinct, born of a foolish, lingering hope for paternal pride, was to call Mark. I thought, naively, that this news would be big enough to pierce his armor of self-interest. His reaction was immediate, but not in the way I'd hoped. There was no joy, no congratulations, Leo. There was only the swift, predatory sound of him co-opting the achievement. Columbia. Of course he got in. He's my son. The kid's got my genes, he'd boomed over the phone. This is fantastic. Great for the family name. Don't worry, I'll handle the PR with my parents and the rest of the family. He immediately framed it as his victory, a product of his superior lineage. When the conversation turned to the astronomical tuition, he was suddenly vague. We'll figure it out, he'd said dismissively. I'll contribute what I can. His contribution ended up being a one-time payment of $5,000, less than a tenth of a single year's cost, a gesture so paltry it was insulting. But to the outside world, he was the hero. He was the father funding his son's Ivy League education. The breaking point, the precise moment my years of quiet resentment finally hardened into a diamond-hard resolve, came a few weeks later. I was scrolling through Facebook, a habit I hated but couldn't seem to break. And there it was. A post from Jessica. I was done being a ghost. I was done being silent. I was going to get a receipt for every single sacrifice, every tear, every dollar. I stood up, walked down to the damp, musty basement of my apartment building, and found the storage locker. In the back, behind old baby clothes and forgotten toys, was a heavy cardboard file box. On the side, I'd scrawled, "Mark's excuses," in black marker years ago. I pried open the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved, were the artifacts of my struggle: stacks of bank statements, credit card bills circled in red, copies of bounced checks, and printouts of every pleading email and pathetic text message. It was all there. 18 years of evidence. I pulled the box out into the dim light of the single dangling bulb, blew a layer of dust off the top, and whispered to the empty room, "Okay, Mark. Let's tally the bill." The 4 years of Leo's time at Columbia became my secret project. While he was studying political science and discovering the wonders of New York City, I was in my small New Jersey apartment, becoming the forensic accountant of my own life. My mission was methodical, almost obsessive. I bought a new laptop and a high-speed scanner. My evenings were no longer for cheap wine and Netflix, they were for data entry. I created a master spreadsheet, a sprawling, color-coded monument to Mark's neglect. It had columns for everything: tuition payments, student housing, meal plans, textbooks, health insurance, flights home for holidays, emergency dental work. For every expense, I scanned the original invoice, the canceled check from my account, or the credit card statement showing the charge. I highlighted my name on every single one. Then, in the adjacent column, I entered Mark's contribution, a long, unbroken string of zeros. Row after row, the spreadsheet painted a brutal, mathematical portrait of the truth. $75,320 for freshman year tuition and fees. My contribution, $75,320. Mark's contribution, $0. A $1,250 charge for books at the campus bookstore. My contribution, $1,250. Mark's contribution, $0. It went on and on, a digital tapestry woven from my sacrifice. But the financial accounting was only part of the story. The real debt was emotional, and that required a different kind of ledger. I started a new document, titling it, "The Unpaid Invoices." I went through old journals, calendars, and emails, documenting the moments of his absence with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. October 25, Leo's 19th birthday, 3-minute phone call from Mark, cut short because he had a dinner meeting at per se he couldn't miss. I had spent the day baking his favorite cake and mailing it to his dorm. April 12, Parents' Weekend, I took the train into the city alone. Mark claimed he had to fly to London for business. His Instagram story showed him and Jessica at a polo match in the Hamptons. November 22, Thanksgiving, I paid for Leo's flight home. Mark texted on Thanksgiving Day, "Happy Turkey Day. Super swamped, talk soon." These weren't just memories, they were evidence. Each one was a line item in the audit of his fatherhood. I screenshot the damning social media posts, saved the call logs, and printed the text messages, with their flimsy excuses and hollow promises. I was building a case so airtight, so overwhelmingly factual, that it would be impossible to refute. My obsession with the project became my shield. It took the messy, painful emotions of the past 18 years and converted them into clean, manageable data. The anger was still there, but it was a cold, quiet anger now, channeled into the meticulous organization of my files. It was a long, slow-burning fuse. One Saturday afternoon, Mark made an unannounced visit. He was in New Jersey to play golf at a nearby country club and decided to pop in. I nearly had a heart attack. My dining table was covered in bank statements and spreadsheets. I managed to shove it all into a box and hide it in a closet seconds before he knocked. He strolled in, looking tan and relaxed in his pastel polo shirt, casting a disdainful eye around my small apartment. "Still living here, huh?" he said, not as a question, but as a judgment. "You know, Sarah, you really need to let go of the past. It's not healthy to hold on to things." He had no idea. He saw my modest life as a failure, a sign that I was stuck. He couldn't comprehend that it was a choice, that every penny I didn't spend on myself went into the column labeled Leo's future. His obliviousness was staggering, and it was the fuel that kept me going. He saw weakness, he had no idea he was looking at a weapon being forged. The week before graduation, the invitation arrived. It was printed on thick cardstock, with elegant calligraphy announcing a celebratory dinner in honor of Leo Martin, hosted by Mr. Mark and Mrs. Jessica Martin. It was the final insult, the last attempt to purchase a narrative he hadn't earned. I circled my RSVP for one, mailed it back, and then turned to my laptop. I opened the folder labeled The Project. For 4 years, I had collected the raw data. Now, it was time to put it together. I created a new PowerPoint presentation. The design template was simple, clean, and corporate, the kind of aesthetic Mark would appreciate. The title slide was stark and brutal in its simplicity. It read, "The Real Cost of a Columbia Education, a 4-Year Audit." Presented by Sarah Martin. I clicked through the slides I'd prepared, each one a perfectly aimed dagger of truth. When I was finished, I saved the file to a small, silver USB drive, a tiny vessel for 18 years of righteous fury. I dropped it into my purse, where it lay, cold and heavy, waiting for its moment. The morning of the graduation was a performance of forced civility. Leo was a bundle of nervous energy and excitement, his blue graduation gown draped over a chair, his mortarboard sitting on the kitchen table like a strange, academic crown. He was trying his best to bridge the chasm between his parents, a role he'd been forced into his entire life. "Mom, Dad's really excited," he said, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the microwave door. "He's been texting me all morning. He's just so proud." I smiled, a tight, brittle thing. "I know, sweetie. We all are." The "we" felt like a lie in my mouth. Before I could object, I was herded into a photo, a reluctant prop in Mark's production. I stood beside my son, a foot of empty space between me and my ex-husband, a carefully constructed smile plastered on my face. The ride to the graduation dinner was its own special kind of hell. Mark had booked a private room at The View, the revolving restaurant at the top of the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. It was so perfectly him, expensive, ostentatious, and designed to impress. We rode up in the glass elevator, the glittering canyons of Manhattan falling away beneath us. Mark held court, pointing out landmarks, regaling Leo's friends with stories of his business triumphs. I stood in the corner, clutching my purse, the small, hard rectangle of the USB drive a secret anchor in the dizzying ascent. The private dining room was even worse than I'd imagined. The view was undeniably spectacular, a 360-degree panorama of the city lights. But the room itself felt suffocating. It was filled with Mark's world, his partners from the firm, their impeccably dressed wives, his smug-looking parents, and a few of Jessica's relatives. Leo's friends looked slightly bewildered, like they'd wandered onto the wrong movie set. And there, stretched across the main wall, was the banner. A massive vinyl sign, at least 10 feet long, in Columbia's signature blue and white. It read, "Congratulations, Leo. Proudly sponsored by Dad." I felt a laugh, a sharp, hysterical sound, bubble up in my throat, and I had to physically swallow it down. He'd actually put it in writing. He'd printed his lie on a banner for the world to see. I scanned the room. In the corner, next to a large screen I hadn't noticed on the invitation, was a small table with a projector and a laptop. The event planner, a harried-looking woman with a headset, caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. I had called her the week before, posing. In the left column was a list of events, parents' weekends, birthday dinners, holiday visits, care packages sent. In the right column, under the heading Mark Martin, was a single word, repeated over and over, absent. 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 I let the slide hang there for a long, painful moment, the word echoing in the silence. Then I looked directly at Mark, whose face was now the color of ash. "And now," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "for the final receipt. The one that started it all." I clicked one last time. The image that appeared on the screen was old and slightly faded. It was a scanned copy of a check from 18 years ago. The check was from Mark, made out to me, for the paltry sum of $200, his first ever child support payment. Stapled to it was a bank slip, the kind they give you when a deposit goes wrong. And stamped across it in stark, aggressive red ink were 2 words, insufficient funds. To the right of that damning image, I had scanned another document, the receipt from the predatory payday loan office I'd had to visit that same week. A loan for $250, at an interest rate that was nothing short of criminal, just so I could buy groceries and diapers for our 2-year-old son. This, I said, my voice steady but laced with the ice of 2 decades of suppressed rage, is the foundation you provided, Mark. The one I built everything on. The silence in the room finally shattered. It wasn't loud, it was a series of small, sharp sounds. A collective gasp. The clink of a fork being dropped. A horrified whisper from one of the partners' wives. Mark stood there, utterly exposed, the carefully constructed edifice of his life crumbling to dust around him in real time. Jessica looked as if she might be physically ill. His parents stared at their shoes, their faces etched with a shame so profound it was almost pitiful. And Leo, my son, was looking at the screen, then at his father, then back at the screen. The confusion on his face was slowly being replaced by a dawning, agonizing wave of understanding. The fog of his father's charisma and wealth was burning away, revealing the barren landscape underneath. He was finally seeing the truth, inarguable and meticulously documented. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I had said everything I needed to say. I calmly walked back to the table, ejected the USB drive from the laptop, and slipped it back into my purse. The click of the magnetic clasp felt like the locking of a vault. I walked over to my son, who was still staring at his father, the fallen idol. I gently placed a hand on his arm, and he flinched, as if waking from a long dream. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide with 1,000 unspoken questions. Leo, I said softly, my voice for him and him alone. I am so incredibly proud of you. Let's get out of here. He nodded, a single, decisive motion. He stood up, pushed his chair in, and without a single glance back at the man who had written his name on a banner, he followed me. We walked out of that private dining room, leaving behind the wreckage of Mark's reputation, the accusing silence of his colleagues, and the smoking crater where his lies used to be. We didn't run. We just walked, side by side, out into the dizzying, brilliant chaos of Times Square. The noise of the city, the river of yellow cabs, the overwhelming glare of the digital billboards, it all washed over us, a baptism in the real world. We stood on the curb for a long moment, the cool night air a welcome shock. Leo was quiet, processing the implosion he had just witnessed. Finally, he turned to me, his face illuminated by the flashing lights of 100 advertisements. His eyes, for the first time, looked clear, free of the conflict that had clouded them for so long. Thank you, Mom, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond gratitude. For everything. I just nodded, a lump forming in my own throat. I raised my hand and hailed a cab. As we climbed in, the leather seat cool against my skin, I took one last look back at the glittering Marriott Tower, a monument to a hollow, performative life. The car pulled into the flow of traffic, and we drove away, leaving it all behind. The funny thing about receipts is that they don't just show you what something costs, they prove who truly paid the price. The end.